Hey guys, this is Ryan with Steel Wheel Games. Um, I would like to discuss poker hand rankings. Hopefully, this will be helpful to people just starting out with poker, dealers, and players. So let's just jump into it. All right, let's start at the bottom. I was going to start from the top, but I think it might make more sense to start from the bottom. So, when dealing with poker cards or a deck of cards, uh, we start at deuce. The card two in poker terminology is called a deuce. That's the lowest possible card, and we could talk about suits. Technically, the deuce of clubs is the lowest possible card, but any deuce when in live play is considered the lowest card. The deuce, the rank itself, the number. Then we can go straight up the line. So we've got deuce. We got tray. The number three. The card is called a tray. And then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is basic counting, right? But some people might not be aware. Once you get to the face cards, the cards that have the royalty on it, the jack comes above the 10, and the queen is greater than the jack, and the king is greater than the queen. And then the ace is considered the highest rank of card in a poker deck. So again, deuce at the bottom, all the way up to the ace. And when you get into the face cards, jack, queen, king. That's the ranking. So the jack is kind of, like the prince of the family. The queen is lower than the king. Um, and then the ace is the ranked card, the highest ranked card. The ace of spades, like right here, is called the trump card. Um, but that name doesn't really come into play very often in a game of poker, but that's what it's called, the trump card. So in any scenario where there's no, made hands in a five-card hand of poker, no pairs, no sets, no two pairs, no straights, things like that, then the single individual card would win. That's the highest. And if you have an ace would be higher than a king, and so you would win if you just had an ace high versus a king high. So now we can get into the pairs. So a pair of aces is going to be a pair of kings because, again, the ace is higher than the king. So two aces would be higher than two kings, and therefore two kings would be higher than two queens would be higher than two jacks would be higher than two fours, and two threes would be higher than two deuces. Two trays would be higher than two deuces. All right, so those are single pairs. Pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Uh, Now, let's talk about a couple of scenarios you might see in a live Texas Hold'em game. Looking at these two large boxes down here. Let's look at this box first. So let's assume you're holding a pair of fives. Sorry, we're moving into two pairs now. So we just discussed one pairs, or one pair over another one pair. Now let's look at two pairs. So let's say you have two whole cards. You're dealt two fives, a pair of fives, and your opponent has trash, seven deuce. Okay, we're not going to discuss like the nuance of playing a game. We're just going to consider some scenarios here. And the board comes out for the flop, the first three cards, 10, 10, 3. Right? So what do you have? You have two pair. You have two tens and two fives with a three kicker, basically. Okay. Texas Hold'em is played where you're trying to make the best five-card hand out of all seven cards that you'll eventually have. And your opponent, what do they have? Well, they have a pair of tens with a seven kicker, right? Their seven is higher, or the card that's your highest card, that's not, part of the pairs or better, is called a kicker. So we have two tens with a seven kicker. So right now you're doing great. You have tens and fives. Now let's say a jack comes on. So now what do you have? Well, you have two tens and two fives with a jack kicker. Okay. What does your opponent have? Your opponent has a pair of tens with a jack kicker. So again, you still have two pair. You're looking fine. Well, what could happen on this last card, right? Let's assume this is a blank card and we don't know what's going to come yet. Well, what things would be painful or hurt you as the player? Well, a jack, if a jack comes, what happens? Now you have jacks and tens on the board, two pair jacks and tens, and your opponent has a 7 kicker, and you have a 5 kicker, right? So you started with a nice pair, and you flopped 2 pair, but now the board has run out 2 pairs, which essentially this is called counterfeiting. Counterfeiting is when your nice hand, your nice pair here, is made redundant, I guess, as the English would say, and it's worthless now because you can't play 3 pairs in a game of poker, right? You can only play 5 cards. So Jack, Jack, 10, 10, and then the 5th card that you can play would be your 5. So this terrible 7 deuce starting hand is now the winner because your 5s are meaningless after these 2 pair run out. Okay, let's look at a different scenario. You're holding ace king, and your opponent holds king 5. The flop comes out king 4 4. What do you have? Well, you have essentially, close to the nuts. It's not the exact nuts because there could be a 4 out there or a pair of kings. But right now you have 2 pair. You have kings and 4s with an ace kicker. What does your opponent have? Your opponent has kings and 4s with a 5 kicker. So your ace kicker, your ace high 5th card, is better than his 5 high 5th card. So you're essentially dominating. That's what it's called in poker, dominating this player. Now the turn comes a 5. Well, what happened now? Well, you still have 2 pair kings and 4s, ace kicker, but your opponent now just made kings and 5s. Kings and 5s with a 4 kicker. Okay? Now the 4 kicker is pretty much irrelevant. The point is that he has kings and 5s, and the pair of 5s, because his second card connected, is better than these 2 4s, which is your second pair, kings and 4s. So now he's winning. And you would have to spike either a king to make both of you a tied full house. Actually, no, I'm sorry. A king wouldn't help you because king would give you kings full of 4s, and it would give him kings full of 5s. So you're dead unless an ace comes out, and there's only 3 aces left in the deck. So this river card would have to be one of the 3 aces for you to win here. So you're essentially on this turn card, this 4th card, you're dominated here. That's a scenario that can happen with 2 pair. So just to show you here, kings and 10s are beat by aces and 9s, right? The first pair is higher than the first pair that you have. The highest pair that you have is beating the highest pair that your opponent has, the kings. And if you both had ace, 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 and you had 9s and they had 8s, your second pair, the 9s, would beat the second pair of 8s. So ace, ace, 9, 9 would be ace, ace, 8, 8. And then the kicker in that situation is irrelevant. Now, if you both had ace, ace, 9, 9, ace, ace, 9, 9, and then you had a jack and they had a 7, your jack kicker would play, and you would win that way. So let me make sure I didn't miss anything there. Yep. Okay, now let's look at the 3 of a kind, the 3 of a kind scenario here. So 3 of a kind is obviously, let's say you had deuce, 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 3 deuces, and your next 2 cards would come into play if you had to play a kicker, and we'll look at a scenario where you would need a kicker in a minute. But 3 kings, king, 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 would be deuce, 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 okay, and ace, ace, ace would be king, king, king. So in a situation where you had ace, 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 and your opponent had king, 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 as long as there's no other pair coming into play, the higher 3 of a kind would win. Now, 3 of a kind is called a set or trips, and many people think these are the same thing, or they'll call whatever 3 of a kind they happen to encounter a set or trips, but these are actually 2 different things. They're not interchangeable, and let's look at the scenarios where that's relevant. Okay, so let's start with trips, since it's a little more common to have trips. Um, so trips is a scenario where, let's say you're holding a queen with an ace kicker, and your opponent has a queen as well with a 10 kicker. The board comes out queen, jack, queen on the flop, the first three cards. Well, you've got queen, 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 jack, ace. So you have three of a kind queens with an ace kicker. But your opponent also has queen, queen, queen with a 10 kicker. Or, I'm sorry, he's playing the jack as his kicker because the jack is the highest card possible for him. So this situation is called trips. This is called trips. When there's a pair on the board and one of your cards connects with the pair, that's called trips. And the reason why trips are different than a set, and it's actually a very precarious situation to be in, is let's say you're this person and you have this 10 kicker, you have three of a kind queens, you're feeling pretty confident about it. You're like, wow, I just made three of a kind, that's a pretty big hand. But it's very easy when there's a pair on the board for your opponent and yourself to both hold one of the card that makes the three of a kind, right? You only need to have one of those cards, and if the board runs out pairs, the board has done the work for you, in which case your kicker is going to be very important here. A lot of people lose a lot of money on trips because they overplay it when their kicker is not very good. So you need to be very careful in those circumstances. Now, what's a set? A set, to me, is probably the most powerful hand possible in poker. And of course, there's higher hands that are possible that we'll look at. But when it comes to, regular day-to-day kind of play, grinding play, the set is the hand that you're going to encounter the most, where you're probably going to end up losing the most of your chips. So a set is when you have a pair, 9-9, let's say, for example, and the board comes out with the third of your card. So you made three of a kind, but you're holding the pair, okay? And your third card comes out. Now, when you have a pair, the odds that your third card will come out is about 1 every 8.5 times. So 1 to 7.5, basically. And the reason why this is so either advantageous if you're holding that pair, or very dangerous if you've run into it, if you encounter it as the opponent, is that, let's say you're holding a 6 and the board comes out paired 6-6. Well, you're like, wow, I've got three of a kind, 3 6s with an ace kicker. That's the best possible kicker. Three of a kind is huge. But see, this 9, you have no possible way to know that your opponent hit this unless you're very, very perceptive and cautious in the way you play. Okay, if you kind of can tease out through the individual streets of betting that he may have made this as a possibility, you might be able to sniff it out. But against a player that knows what they're doing, it's very likely in this spot that you're going to run into a lot of trouble. And now look what happens on this fourth turn card. You hit your ace. Now you've got 6-6-6 ace ace. You've got a full house, sixes full of aces. Seems like an incredibly strong hand, but again, your opponent already flopped 9s full of 6s. So the 3 9s are greater than the 3 6s, therefore your boat is irrelevant when you hit this ace because they already made the pair they needed for the bigger boat. And again, in this scenario, you're probably going to lose your shirt unless you can somehow figure out that they have that pair of 9s. And then, the fifth card would, in this situation, be irrelevant if it was a 3. But there's other situations where it could be relevant, but you're just going to need to be very careful. So we talked about three of a kind. Let's keep moving up the leaderboard here. And now we're looking at straights. So straights are 5 of a kind, or 5 in a row of the ranked cards, right? So starting from the ace at the bottom, I know I said earlier that the ace was the highest card, but when you're dealing with straights, the ace can be played as a 1, so a lower card than a deuce. So ace, deuce, 3, 4, 5 is the lowest possible straight, and in poker terms, that's called a wheel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the wheel. And then any individual rank that's higher than that incrementally would beat the next one down. So a 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 deuce sorry, I should be saying the right term. 6-5-4 tray deuce would be a 5-4-3-2 ace tray deuce. I should be saying the term, sorry. So like a 10 high straight, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 would obviously be a 5 high straight, or a 9 high straight, or 8 high straight, or 7 high straight, etc. Just like a jack high straight would be a 10 high straight. And then I'm actually going to copy this real quick because this actually has a term as well. This is called a Broadway. So the highest possible straight that's not, a flush or anything else like that is the ace high. So on the wheel, the ace plays low, but on a Broadway, the ace plays high. So 10, jack, queen, king, ace, that's called Broadway, and that's the highest possible straight. So an ace high Broadway is going to be any of the other straights with the numbered sequentially. Let's look at a couple quick scenarios here with straights. So let's say we've got a board that looks like this, 7, 6, 5, 4 tray, and we've got 3 players in the hand at showdown. This player turns over 8 jack, this player turns over 8 deuce, this player turns over 8 ace deuce. Well, who's winning here? Well, we're assuming we're playing a high game because there are games that play low. But your first instinct might be to look for this straight. Well, we've got a straight on the board, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So everybody has a straight. Well, yes, but look at the hands. This player has an 8 jack. The jack isn't going to connect to the straight, but the 8 does. So this is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This player has a deuce. So he has deuce, tray, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's actually a 7-card straight, but in poker that's meaningless. You can only play 5 cards. So your spider sense might be tingling here, but let me get through. I'll come back to this. So he has an 8 here, so you think, okay, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, he's sharing a straight with this person. And then this person has an ace deuce. Oh, they're holding an ace. Well, that's high, right? Well, no, this is a wheel. Ace, deuce, tray, 4, 5. But the ace is irrelevant because his deuce connects to the board here. So he has a deuce, tray, 4, 5, 6. But that's irrelevant also because the board, the tray, 4, 5, 6, 7, is higher than both his cards. So he's playing the board. He's playing a 7 high straight. This player, the hero, is playing an 8 high straight. This person's playing, well, no, it's not an 8 high straight. Look at their cards. They have 2 hearts, a deuce of hearts, and there's 3 hearts on the board. 4, 5, 6 of hearts. So this is actually a flush, and that player is going to win. Okay, this player is going to win with a 8 high flush, and that's what we're going to look at next. So we've got straights, and then that leads us into our flushes. Okay, so a ace high flush, where 5 of your cards are the same suit, is going to be a king high flush. Okay, just like a king high flush would beat a queen high flush, a queen high flush would beat a 9 high flush, a 9 high flush would beat a 4 high flush. Actually, you can't have a 4 high. The highest flush you could have is a 5 high flush, which actually a 5 high flush would probably be the winner, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So let's look at this scenario. The board runs out 7, 5, 4, 3 spades with a different suited jack. Okay, jack of hearts. What's being held here? We've got a 6, 9 with a 6 of spades. So they've got 5 spades. That's a flush. And then we've got an ace, king of hearts with the ace of spades. So this is an ace high flush. Well, that's got to be the winner, right? Ace high flush. Ace is the highest card. There's a flush. Well, look at these cards. These are connected here. 3, 4, 5. What's missing? A 6, right? 3, 4, 5. There could be a 6 and then a 7. Well, you're holding the 6 of spades. That makes a straight flush. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of spades. So it's all flush and it's all a straight, and that's called a straight flush. Okay, so a straight flush beats an ace high flush. But there's actually different hands before we get to the straight flushes. I just want to show a couple of those scenarios before we do there. If you can see here, if both players have 2 suited cards of different suits, it's not possible to make 2 flushes. Okay, there's only ever going to be 1 suit of flushes. Okay, so if there's 3 spades on the board, there can only be a spade flush. There can't be a heart flush as well, because there's only 1, 2 cards that are remaining, and the opponent can only hold 2 hearts. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 hearts, opposed to 5 spades. Okay, so these both players could both hold a flush if they all have spades, but there cannot be 2 different flushes. So only one flush will ever play on a flushed board. Here's a board that ran out an ace high flush, so 5 of a kind. So, you know, if you say, oh, I'm going to play the board, I've got an ace high flush. Well, look at what we're holding. This player has a king spade with a diamond deuce, and this player has 2 of the spades. Okay, so on the flop, this player flopped a flush. Great. But this player turned that 4th flush card, which gave them the king high flush. So this player had essentially the nuts on the turn. King with the ace high on the board. The king high is going to play. So this player was essentially counterfeited by these running flush cards. Similar situation here. You flop the flush. You've got the king, queen of diamonds. You feel like you're golden. King comes out. Great. Doesn't change anything. But then the river card is a diamond, and the opponent has an ace of diamonds, so that's gonna outkick your king. Okay, doesn't matter that you hold the higher king and queen. You know, the 2 cards together. The only thing that matters is the kicker card, which is the ace of diamonds in this case. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 diamonds. That's a flush. Okay, so let's go down and to the left here. And now we're moving into the monster territory, right? Monster hands, hands that you generally feel like you can't lose with. So this is the realm of the full house. Full house is 3 of a kind, so trips or sets plus a pair. All right, 3 cards plus 2 cards. And full houses are also called boats. So the lowest possible full house would be deuce, deuce, deuce as your 3 of a kind, and then tray, tray, you know, would be the lowest possible pair. You can't have, I mean, can't be deuce, 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 because that'd be 5 deuces. That's not possible. So it's just 3 deuces, and then whatever your second pair is, that would be the lowest kind of boat. So 3 eights and a pair of 10s would be 3 deuces and a pair of aces, right? The aces in this case are essentially irrelevant because the 3 eights with the pair of 10s are better than the 3 deuces with any pair. 3 10s and 2 eights are going to be 3 eights and 2 10s. Okay, this can be confusing trying to read a board when this kind of scenario happens, but it does happen. You got to make sure that the 3 of a kind is bigger than the other opponent's 3 of a kind. 3 of a kind queens with jacks would be 3 of a kind 10s with 8s. 3 of a kind queens with jacks would be 3 of a kind queens with 10s, right? If both players are playing the 3 of a kind, the same 3 of a kind, then the pair, you know, the kicker pair would play, and 3 aces are going to beat, you know, 3 queens or whatever below. 3 aces with 2 kings beats 3 aces with 2 queens, etc. All right, so we got through the boats. Again, those are pretty powerful hands if you can make a boat. Pretty rare. It's nice to hit them when you can. But let's say that, you know, the flop is ace, 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 and you're holding, you know, a pair of kings in your hand, so you have aces full of kings. Well, when you flop 3 of a kind on the board, or if the board runs out any 3 of a kind, it's very possible, you know, rare but very possible that your opponent could hold that 4th card, right? That 4th ace. And when that person has the 4th ace or any 4 of a kind, now we're in the realm of quads, or 4 of a kind, which are also called quads. Okay, so 4 of a kind deuces with any kicker. And when you have 4 of a kind, the kicker is really irrelevant because the only way you can lose is to a higher 4 of a kind, right? So you can't have 4 of a kind deuces against another 4 of a kind deuces. Quick caveat here, of course, if the board runs out 4 of a kind, then if you hold an ace and your opponent holds a king, your ace kicker would win against their king kicker when you both have the 4 of a kind on the board. That is a scenario that does happen, and it just spaced my mind out for a second as I was doing the initial video. So four of a kind kings would obviously be any four of a kind that's lower than that. Four of a kind aces is obviously going to be the highest of the quads. So if you get four of a kind aces, I mean, you can look at this board here. You're better than 90%, 95% of the possible hands that you're going to be facing with that four of a kind. Probably, I would say 99%, of the hands you're going to face. Because what can beat four of a kind? Well, now you're looking at straight flushes, okay? And I said earlier, if you had a 5-high flush, you're probably in a scenario where you're going to be winning, because a 5-high flush would have to mean that your 4 other cards are lower, in which case you've got 5, 4, 3, deuce, ace, and that's a straight flush, right? So straight flush, and when the ace is the lowest card, if it's 1 to 5, ace to 5, that's called a steel wheel. A steel wheel. That's a straight flush 5-high. And then sequentially from there, a 6-high straight flush would be to 5-high, or and all the way up. So 10-high straight flush would be a 9-high straight flush. Queen-high straight flush would be to jack-high straight flush, and you're never going to see a situation where it's 5 of a flush of a different suit beating another suit. I said there could only ever be one flush, right? So if this was a queen-high straight flush, the only other hand possible that would even come close would be if the opponent has like a 7 of hearts in their hand. If the board is jack 10 9 8 of hearts, if you're holding the queen of hearts, you're going to beat somebody holding a 7 of hearts. And then the mother of all mothers of cards is the royal flush, right? So 10 jack queen king ace in a row, same suit. That's called a royal flush, right? All face cards with the ace and the 10 of the same suit. So hopefully that was helpful. I tried to look at a few scenarios that might come into play live. And essentially that's it. If you can get that flow chart down in your mind, high card, 1 pair beats a high card, 2 pair beats 1 pair, 3 of a kind beats 2 pair, straight beats any of the below, a flush beats a straight, full house beats a flush, 4 of a kind beats a full house, and a straight flush beats 4 of a kind. Okay, you can find lots of videos on YouTube of scenarios where people, run quad aces into a straight flush, run a king high with trips against an ace high with trips. It happens all the time, all over the world, all kinds of poker games. This happens. It doesn't have to just be in Texas Hold'em. It can be in your stud games. It can be in your draw games. But this is essentially the high only 5-card poker hands. Okay, so I hope that was helpful and informative. And again, I'm Ryan with Steel Wheel Games. If you're interested in learning poker dealing, I'll put up my contact, and please get in touch with me, and I'll see you next time.